I was sitting on my back patio in Scottsdale, Arizona, watching the flames dance in my brand new propane fire pit, when I heard the sharp knock on my front door that would turn my peaceful evening into a 3-month battle with the Sunset Ridge HOA. The sun was setting over the desert landscape, casting that perfect golden light across my yard. I had spent the better part of $2,000 on this fire pit, a beautiful copper-finished model with a glass wind guard and realistic-looking logs. It was CSA certified, had all the proper safety features, and I had positioned it exactly where the manufacturers recommended, at least 15 feet from my house and any overhanging structures. I loved sitting out there after work, beer in hand, just decompressing from the chaos of my job as a software engineer at a local tech startup. The knocking continued, more insistent now. I sighed and set down my beer, making my way through the house. Through the frosted glass of my front door, I could see the silhouette of someone standing with their hands on their hips. That posture alone told me everything I needed to know. I opened the door to find Barbara Wellington, president of the Sunset Ridge HOA, standing on my doorstep with her signature look of perpetual disapproval. She was probably in her late 40s, with that precise haircut that seemed to be regulation issue for HOA board members everywhere, and she clutched a leather folder against her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Oliver Ramsey," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to discuss your recent installation." "Barbara," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "What installation would that be? Do not play games with me. The fire pit in your backyard. Multiple neighbors have reported seeing flames, and I myself witnessed it just moments ago." "That is a clear violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 of our community guidelines." I leaned against the doorframe. "The section about open flames." "Exactly." She flipped open her folder with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor presenting damning evidence. "No resident shall maintain any open flame device including but not limited to fire pits, chimneys, or outdoor fireplaces without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Board." "It's propane, Barbara, not wood burning. There's a difference." Her eyes narrowed. "A flame is a flame, Oliver. The rule exists for the safety of all residents in Sunset Ridge. Do you know what would happen if that thing got out of control? We are in the desert. Fire spreads quickly here." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper would only make things worse. "I understand the concern, but propane fire pits are specifically designed to be safe. They have shut-off valves, flame controls, and they produce significantly less smoke and heat than traditional fire pits. Plus, I can turn it off instantly if needed." "That may be, but you did not seek approval before installing it. That alone is a violation." She pulled out a piece of paper from her folder. "This is your official notice. You have 72 hours to remove the fire pit or face a fine of $250. If it remains after 7 days, the fine increases to $500, and you will receive an additional $250 each subsequent week until compliance is achieved." She thrust the paper at me. I took it, scanning the formal language that basically said exactly what she had just told me. "This is ridiculous," I said. "Half the neighborhood has gas grills. Those have open flames too." "Grills are specifically exempted in Section 7, Paragraph 3, subsection B," Barbara replied without missing a beat. "They are considered necessary cooking appliances. A fire pit is recreational and therefore subject to approval." "Fine. I will submit an application to the Architectural Review Board." "That is your right, but the fire pit must be removed until such approval is granted. Good evening, Oliver." She turned on her heel and walked back down my driveway, her sensible shoes clicking against the concrete. I closed the door and looked at the notice again. This was exactly the kind of petty bureaucratic nonsense that made me question why I had bought a house in an HOA community in the first place. When I had purchased this property 2 years ago, the HOA had seemed reasonable enough. The neighborhood was beautiful, the amenities were nice, and the rules had appeared straightforward. But Barbara had been elected president about 8 months ago, and since then, she had been on a crusade to enforce every single guideline with the zeal of a medieval inquisitor. I walked back to my patio and sat down, staring at the fire pit. The flames were still dancing peacefully, completely controlled, presenting absolutely no danger to anyone or anything. My neighbor to the left, Tom, had a massive gas grill that probably produced more heat and flame than my fire pit. My neighbor to the right, the Hendersons, had string lights that were probably more of a fire hazard than my propane setup. I pulled out my phone and started researching. If Barbara wanted to play this game, I was going to play it smart. I found the Scottsdale Fire Department website and started reading through their regulations on outdoor fire features. From what I could see, propane fire pits were perfectly legal as long as they met certain safety standards. Mine exceeded those standards. The next morning, I called the Scottsdale Fire Marshal's office. The phone rang 3 times before a woman answered. Fire Marshal's office, this is Linda speaking. Hi Linda, my name is Oliver Ramsey and I have a question about propane fire pits. I'm having an issue with my HOA, and I want to make sure I understand the actual fire code. Sure, I can help you with that. What specifically do you need to know? I explained the situation with Barbara and the HOA, the notice I had received, and the specifications of my fire pit. Linda listened patiently. Okay, so from what you are describing, your fire pit sounds like it is compliant with our fire code. Propane fire pits are allowed in Scottsdale as long as they meet the manufacturer's safety specifications and are positioned properly. How far is it from your house? 15 feet, and it is about 20 feet from my fence line. That should be fine. You know what? Let me connect you with Inspector Davis. He handles these types of questions all the time, and he might be able to help you with your HOA situation. There was a click, some hold music, and then a deep male voice came on the line. This is Fire Inspector Marcus Davis. I went through the whole story again. Inspector Davis asked several detailed questions about the fire pit's make and model, its installation, and the surrounding area. Then he said something that gave me an idea. Mr. Ramsey, here is the thing. Your HOA can make rules about aesthetics and when you can use something, but they cannot make rules that contradict fire code. If your fire pit meets code, which it sounds like it does, they cannot call it a fire hazard. Now, they can still require you to get their approval for aesthetic reasons, but they cannot use safety as the justification if the fire pit is actually safe. Is there any way to get that in writing? Some kind of official documentation that shows my fire pit meets fire code? Inspector Davis was quiet for a moment. We do not usually certify individual residential fire features, but given your situation, I could come out and do an inspection. If it passes, I can provide you with a written report stating that it complies with all applicable fire safety codes. Would that help? That would be perfect. When could you come out? I have some time this afternoon, actually. How about 2 o'clock? I agreed immediately and gave him my address. This was exactly what I needed. If the fire marshal certified my fire pit as safe, Barbara would have no leg to stand on with her safety arguments. I spent the rest of the morning working from home, occasionally glancing out at the fire pit sitting innocently in my backyard. At exactly 2 o'clock, a white truck with the Scottsdale Fire Department logo pulled into my driveway. Inspector Davis turned out to be a tall man in his 50s with a neat mustache and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Ramsey, that's me. Thanks for coming out." "No problem. Let's take a look at this fire pit." I led him to the backyard. He walked around the fire pit slowly, examining it from every angle. He checked the propane tank connection, tested the ignition system, measured the distances to various structures, and took several photos. "What model is this?" he asked. "It is the Paramount Elite Series 5000. I have all the documentation inside if you need it. Please." I retrieved the manual, the warranty information, and the original receipt. Inspector Davis reviewed everything carefully, occasionally making notes on a tablet. "Okay," he said after about 30 minutes of inspection. "This unit exceeds all the safety requirements in the fire code. It has proper ventilation, the flame height is controlled and appropriate, the shutoff valve is functioning correctly, and it is positioned at a safe distance from all structures. The unit itself is CSA certified, which means it has been tested and approved by an accredited testing laboratory." He pulled out a form and started filling it out. "I am going to provide you with an official inspection report. This document states that your propane fire pit is compliant with all applicable fire safety codes and regulations for the city of Scottsdale and does not present a fire hazard when used according to the manufacturer's instructions. This is fantastic. Thank you so much." Inspector Davis handed me the completed form. It had his signature, the department seal, and very clear language about the fire pit's compliance. "You are welcome. I hope this helps with your HOA situation. Between you and me, I have seen HOAs try to overreach on safety issues before. They mean well, but sometimes they do not understand the actual regulations." After Inspector Davis left, I made 3 copies of the inspection report, one for my records, one for Barbara, and one to submit with my application to the Architectural Review Board. I took a photo of the document and emailed it to myself as well. That evening, I walked over to Barbara's house. She lived 4 streets over in a home that was immaculately maintained, with a yard that looked like it had been manicured with scissors. I rang the doorbell and waited. Barbara opened the door, and her expression immediately soured when she saw me. "Oliver, what do you want? I wanted to give you this." I handed her one of the copies of the inspection report. "The fire marshal came out today and certified that my fire pit is completely safe and complies with all fire codes." She snatched the paper and read it, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This changes nothing. You still violated the HOA guidelines by installing it without approval." "I am not disputing that. I am submitting an application to the Architectural Review Board, but I wanted you to have this documentation because you said the fire pit was a hazard. According to the actual fire safety expert, it is not. The Architectural Review Board meets once a month. The next meeting is not for 3 weeks. Until they approve it, the fire pit needs to be removed." "Actually, Barbara, I checked the HOA bylaws. Nowhere does it say I have to remove something while waiting for board approval. It says I need approval before installation, which I admit I did not get. But now that it is installed, I can apply for retroactive approval. The bylaws provide for that." Her jaw tightened. "You are walking on very thin ice, Oliver. I am just following the rules, same as you. Have a good evening." I walked away before she could respond, feeling a small sense of satisfaction. It was petty, maybe, but after her high-handed approach the previous day, it felt good to show her that I was not going to be bullied. Over the next week, I prepared my application to the Architectural Review Board. The guidelines were surprisingly detailed. I needed to submit photographs of the fire pit from multiple angles, a site plan showing its exact location, the manufacturer's specifications, proof of purchase, and a written explanation of why I wanted to install it. I included the fire marshal's inspection report as supporting documentation. I submitted everything to the HOA management company that handled the administrative work for Sunset Ridge. The woman who accepted my application seemed sympathetic. "This is very thorough," she said, flipping through the pages. "I will make sure the board receives this before their next meeting." "When is that exactly?" "The second Tuesday of next month." "That would be May 14th. The meeting starts at 7 in the evening at the community clubhouse. You are welcome to attend if you want to speak on behalf of your application. I will be there." In the meantime, I continued using my fire pit. Barbara had sent me another notice reminding me of the fines, but I had responded with a certified letter citing the specific bylaw section that allowed me to keep the fire pit while my application was pending. I also included another copy of the fire marshal's report for good measure. The response was swift and aggressive. 3 days later, I received a letter from a law firm representing the HOA. The letter stated that I was in violation of community guidelines, that my interpretation of the bylaws was incorrect, and that if I did not remove the fire pit immediately, the HOA would take legal action to compel compliance and seek reimbursement for all legal fees. This was escalating faster than I had anticipated. I spent an evening reading through the entire HOA bylaws document, all 43 pages of it. The more I read, the more convinced I became that I was right. The section on retroactive approval was clear. If a homeowner installed something without prior approval, they could apply for approval after the fact. During the review period, the item in question could remain unless it presented an immediate safety hazard or violated local laws. My fire pit did neither. I decided I needed legal advice. I found a lawyer in Phoenix who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Jennifer Ortiz, and her website indicated she had successfully handled dozens of cases against overreaching HOAs. The consultation was scheduled for the following Monday. Jennifer's office was in a modern building in downtown Phoenix, about 30 minutes from my house. She was a sharp-dressed woman in her 30s with an intensity that I immediately appreciated. "So, tell me everything," she said after we exchanged pleasantries. I walked her through the timeline, showed her all the documentation, including the fire marshal's report and the threatening letter from the HOA's attorney. Jennifer reviewed everything carefully, occasionally making notes. When she finished, she looked up with a slight smile. "This is one of the more straightforward cases I have seen. Your fire pit is legal, it is safe, and you have documentation from the fire marshal proving both. The HOA is overreaching." "That is what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. Here is the situation. The HOA has the right to require approval for installations, and you did technically violate that by installing first and asking permission later. However, their bylaws clearly allow for retroactive approval, which you are seeking. The key thing is that they cannot remove or fine you for something that is both legal and safe just because they do not like it aesthetically, not without following their own review process. So, what should I do about this letter from their attorney?" Jennifer tapped her pen against the desk. "I am going to draft a response. Essentially, we are going to cite the relevant bylaw sections, include the fire marshal's report, and point out that the HOA is required to follow its own rules. If they want to deny your application, they need to do so through the proper channels, and they need to have a legitimate reason beyond just not liking it. What are the chances they will approve it? Hard to say. Some HOAs are reasonable once they realize a homeowner is serious and has documentation. Others double down. Based on what you have told me about this Barbara Wellington, she sounds like the doubling down type. But here is the thing. Even if they deny your application, you have grounds to appeal, and if they still refuse, you can challenge it legally. With the fire marshal's report, you have a very strong case. I hired Jennifer on the spot. Having professional legal backing gave me a sense of security I had not felt since this whole mess started. Over the next 2 weeks, Jennifer exchanged correspondence with the HOA's attorney. The tone from their side remained aggressive, but Jennifer's responses were measured and cited specific laws and bylaws. It was fascinating to watch someone who really knew what they were doing. Meanwhile, I started hearing from neighbors. Tom from next door came over one evening while I was grilling dinner. "Hey Oliver, I heard you are having trouble with the HOA over your fire pit. Word travels fast. Barbara came by and asked if the fire pit bothered me. I told her no, it is fine. She seemed disappointed. I flipped a burger. She is trying to build a case that it is a nuisance. Well, she will not get that from me. That thing is awesome. I have been thinking about getting one myself. If you do, get approval first," I said with a laugh. Tom grinned. "Yeah, I have learned that lesson from watching you." A few days later, another neighbor, Susan Henderson from the other side, stopped me while I was getting my mail. "Oliver, I just wanted you to know that Barbara asked me to sign a petition against your fire pit. I did not sign it." "A petition?" "Yeah, she is trying to get signatures from neighbors saying the fire pit is a problem. She came to my door with this whole speech about safety and property values. I told her I had no problem with it. Your yard looks great, and I have never even noticed the fire pit unless I am specifically looking for it." "Thanks, Susan, I appreciate that." "No problem. Between you and me, Barbara has too much time on her hands. She needs a hobby besides harassing neighbors." This was good news. If Barbara was trying to drum up support and failing, it would weaken her position with the Architectural Review Board. The night of the board meeting finally arrived. I dressed in business casual attire and arrived at the community clubhouse at 6:45. The clubhouse was a nice facility with a meeting room, a kitchen, and a small gym. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front where the board members would sit and rows of chairs for residents. Barbara was already there, along with the other 4 board members. There was Donald Murphy, the vice president, a retired accountant who seemed perpetually confused. Teresa Wright, the secretary, was a younger woman who had moved to the neighborhood about a year ago. Then there were 2 at-large members, Gary Phillips, who rarely spoke, and Margaret Chen, who had always struck me as reasonable. Several other residents were also present, including Tom and Susan, which I appreciated. There were also a few people I did not recognize, probably there for other agenda items. The meeting started promptly at 7. Barbara called it to order and went through the standard opening procedures, including approval of the previous meeting's minutes. Then came reports from various committees. It was all very dry and bureaucratic. Finally, they reached new business, which included architectural review applications. "We have 3 applications to review this evening," Barbara announced. The first is from the Johnsons on Cactus Drive, requesting approval to install a pergola. The second is from Oliver Ramsey on Desert View Lane, requesting retroactive approval for a propane fire pit. The third is from the Martinez on Sunset Boulevard, requesting approval to paint their front door. They discussed the pergola application first. It was approved unanimously without much debate. Then Barbara pulled out my application. "Now, regarding Mr. Ramsey's request. As you all know, Mr. Ramsey installed a propane fire pit without seeking prior approval. This is a clear violation of our guidelines. Actually, I said, standing up, may I address the board? Barbara looked annoyed but nodded. You may speak. I walked to the front of the room. Thank you. I want to acknowledge that I should have sought approval before installing the fire pit. That was my mistake, and I apologize for that. However, I am now seeking retroactive approval as allowed under Section 12 of the bylaws. I have provided extensive documentation showing that the fire pit is safe, legal, and compliant with all fire codes. Most importantly, the Scottsdale Fire Marshal has personally inspected the fire pit and certified that it presents no fire hazard. I handed out copies of the Fire Marshal's report to each board member. As you can see from Inspector Davis's report, my fire pit exceeds all safety requirements. It is not a danger to my property or anyone else's property. I have also spoken with my immediate neighbors, and none of them have any objections to it. Donald Murphy raised his hand. I have a question. What is the difference between this fire pit and a regular wood-burning one? Great question, I replied. A propane fire pit has several advantages. First, it produces a controlled flame that can be adjusted and turned off instantly. Second, it produces minimal smoke, so it is not a nuisance to neighbors. Third, it does not produce sparks or embers that could potentially start a fire. And fourth, it does not leave ash or require cleanup. It is essentially similar to a gas grill in terms of safety, just designed for ambience rather than cooking. Margaret Chen spoke next. I have reviewed Mr. Ramsey's application, and I have to say it is very thorough. The fire marshal's certification is particularly compelling. If the fire department says it is safe, I am inclined to believe them. Barbara jumped in. The issue is not just safety. It is about maintaining the aesthetic character of our community. Fire pits, even propane ones, can change the ambience of the neighborhood. How exactly? I asked. The fire pit is in my backyard, not visible from the street. It does not make noise. It does not produce odors. The only way anyone would know it exists is if they are in my backyard or looking over my fence. Teresa Wright looked at the photos in my application. It actually looks quite nice, very tasteful. This is about the principle, Barbara insisted, her voice rising slightly. If we allow one person to install things without approval, where does it end? Rules exist for a reason. And the bylaws have provisions for retroactive approval for a reason, I countered. I made a mistake by not getting approval first, but that does not mean the fire pit itself is inappropriate. I am asking the board to review it on its merits now. Tom stood up from the audience. Can residents speak? This is not a public hearing, Barbara said. Actually, Margaret said, we can allow public comment if we vote to do so. I move that we open the floor to resident comments on this matter. I second, said Donald. Barbara looked furious but could not prevent the vote. It passed 4-1 with only Barbara voting against. Tom came forward. I am Tom Reynolds. I live next door to Oliver. I have seen his fire pit, and it is great. It is quiet, it looks good, and it has never bothered me or my wife. Frankly, I think we are wasting time on this when there are real issues in the neighborhood, like the broken streetlight on Cactus Drive that has been out for 3 months. Susan Henderson spoke next. I live on the other side of Oliver, same thing, no problems whatsoever. Barbara came to my house asking me to sign a petition against it, and I refused because there is nothing wrong with it. Another resident I did not know raised her hand. I do not live near Mr. Ramsey, but I wanted to say that I think the HOA should be focusing on things that actually matter, like the fact that we have been paying for a landscape maintenance company that does not actually trim the hedges properly. My bushes are overgrown, and I have been waiting for 2 months for them to deal with it. This opened a floodgate. Several other residents started talking about various issues they had with the HOA's priorities. Barbara tried to regain control of the meeting, banging a gavel that seemed excessive for the setting. Order. We are getting off topic. The question before the board is whether to approve Mr. Ramsey's fire pit. Margaret looked at the other board members. I move that we approve the application. The fire pit is safe, legal, and has been certified by the fire marshal. Mr. Ramsey has demonstrated good faith by providing extensive documentation and seeking approval retroactively. I see no reason to deny it. I second the motion, Teresa said. Barbara's face was red. This is a mistake. We are setting a dangerous precedent. Let's vote, Donald said, looking uncomfortable with the tension. The vote was 4 in favor, 1 against. Barbara was the only dissenting vote. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you, board members. I appreciate your time and consideration. This is not over, Barbara muttered, but I did not care. I had won. I went home that night feeling vindicated. The board had approved my fire pit. I had followed the process and everything was resolved, or so I thought. 2 weeks later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one stated that while the Architectural Review Board had approved my fire pit, there were now concerns about how often I was using it. According to the letter, several residents had complained about seeing smoke coming from my yard on multiple evenings, and this constituted a nuisance under Section 9 of the bylaws. I read the letter 3 times, my anger building with each reading. This was absurd. Propane fire pits produce virtually no smoke. Even if they did, I used it maybe 3 or 4 times a week, usually for an hour or 2 in the evening. This was clearly Barbara refusing to accept defeat and finding new ways to harass me. I called Jennifer Ortiz. They are reaching, she said after I read her the letter. Propane does not produce smoke. If neighbors are seeing smoke, it is coming from something else or they are lying. What should I do? Document everything. Every time you use the fire pit, note the date, time, and duration. Take photos showing no smoke. If you want to go the extra mile, you could even set up a camera that records your backyard when you are using it. That way, if they claim there was smoke on a particular date, you have video evidence proving otherwise. I took her advice. I bought a simple security camera and mounted it on my back patio with a clear view of the fire pit. I started keeping a log of every time I used it, and I made sure to photograph it running, showing the clear flames and absence of smoke. A month went by. I received 2 more letters from the HOA, each claiming complaints about smoke. Each time, I responded with my documentation proving no smoke was produced. I also filed a formal complaint with the HOA against Barbara Wellington for harassment. That complaint triggered an investigation by the management company. They sent someone out to interview me, and I provided all my documentation, including the fire marshal's report, the board approval, and my usage logs with photos and video evidence. The investigator was professional and thorough. Mr. Ramsey, I have to say, your documentation is impressive. I have reviewed the complaints filed against you, and none of them include specific dates or times. They are all vague claims about smoke and fire hazards. Meanwhile, you have clear evidence that your fire pit produces no smoke and that you are using it reasonably. So, what happens now? I will submit my report to the board. Based on what I have found, I will recommend that no further action be taken regarding your fire pit and that future complaints must include specific evidence such as dates, times, and photographs. That should have been the end of it, but Barbara was not done yet. I came home from work one evening in early July to find a citation from the city of Scottsdale on my door. It stated that someone had filed a complaint about illegal burning on my property, and that an inspector would be coming out to investigate. This had Barbara's fingerprints all over it. She had gone around the HOA and filed a complaint with the city. I called the number on the citation and spoke with a city code enforcement officer named Rachel Kim. Miss Kim, I received a citation about illegal burning, but I do not have any illegal burning. I have a propane fire pit that has already been inspected and certified by the fire marshal's office. Do you have documentation of that inspection? Yes, I have the official report. Can you email that to me? If the fire marshal has already certified it, that should resolve this pretty quickly. I sent her the report within 5 minutes. She called me back an hour later. Mr. Ramsey, I have reviewed the report and spoken with Inspector Davis. Your fire pit is compliant with all codes. I am closing this complaint as unfounded. However, I have to tell you, this is the third complaint we have received about your property in the last month. Third, I only got one citation. The other two were anonymous complaints that we investigated remotely by checking property records and comparing the complaints to city codes. Neither had merit. Someone appears to be repeatedly filing false complaints against you. I know exactly who it is. Can you tell me who filed this most recent complaint? It was filed anonymously through our online portal. But between you and me, filing false complaints is a violation of city ordinance. If it continues, we can trace the IP address used to file the reports and take action against the person responsible. This was getting out of hand. Barbara was not just being petty anymore. She was potentially breaking the law. I contacted Jennifer Ortiz again and explained the situation. This is harassment, she said flatly. And if she is filing false complaints with the city, that is a misdemeanor in Arizona. You need to document every interaction, every letter, every complaint. We are building a case here. A case for what? Restraining order at minimum. Possibly a civil suit for harassment. And if we can prove she is filing false reports, that is a criminal matter. Over the next few weeks, things escalated further. I received a notice that my HOA dues were increasing by a special assessment of $500. When I asked why, I was told it was to cover increased legal fees. A bit of digging revealed that the legal fees in question were from the HOA's lawyer dealing with my fire pit case. I filed an objection, pointing out that the HOA had lost the fire pit dispute, and that it was inappropriate to charge all homeowners for legal fees incurred from the board's decision to fight a losing battle. Several other residents filed similar objections. It turned out that I was not the only person Barbara had been targeting. A man named Frank Douglas, who lived on the other side of the neighborhood, had been fighting with the HOA for months over a basketball hoop in his driveway. A woman named Patricia Green had been cited for having too many flowers in her front yard, which apparently violated some aesthetic guideline about garden density. We started talking and realized that all of our issues had started after Barbara became president. Before her tenure, the HOA had been relatively laid back. Under her leadership, it had become authoritarian. Frank suggested we organize. If enough homeowners are fed up, we can call for a special election to remove her from the board. According to the bylaws, 20% of homeowners could petition for a special election on any matter, including removal of board members. Sunset Ridge had 240 homes, so we needed signatures from 48 homeowners. We started a petition. I drafted a statement explaining the issues: overreach on enforcement, targeting specific homeowners, inappropriate use of HOA funds for legal fees, and creating a hostile environment in what should be a friendly community. Patricia and Frank helped me go door to door. We did not trash Barbara personally. We kept it focused on her actions as president and how they were negatively impacting the community. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, we had over 80 signatures. Many homeowners shared their own stories of petty citations, unreasonable demands, and Barbara's generally aggressive approach to her role. We submitted the petition to the management company, along with a formal request for a special election to remove Barbara Wellington as HOA president. Barbara lost her mind when she found out. She sent an email to all homeowners calling the petition a personal attack, claiming that she was only trying to maintain property values, and suggesting that I was orchestrating a campaign to undermine the HOA's authority. Her email backfired spectacularly. It was so over the top and defensive that it convinced several homeowners who had been on the fence to support the special election. The management company scheduled the election for August 23rd, about 6 weeks after we submitted the petition. In the meantime, Barbara did everything she could to campaign for herself. She sent multiple emails, held a meeting at her house for supporters, and even went door to door asking people to vote to keep her in place. I stayed relatively quiet. I had made my case with the petition, and I did not want this to become a personal mud-slinging match. But I did attend the community meeting scheduled for the week before the election. Barbara had called the meeting to address what she called misinformation and lies. About 70 residents showed up, which was a huge turnout for a community meeting. Barbara stood at the front of the room, her face tight with stress. I called this meeting because I believe there has been a coordinated effort to remove me from my position based on falsehoods and personal vendettas. I have only ever tried to maintain the standards of this community. Frank Douglas raised his hand. Can I ask a question? Go ahead. Why did you cite me for having a basketball hoop in my driveway when my neighbors have the exact same thing and have not been cited? Your basketball hoop was blocking part of the sidewalk. No, it was not. I measured it specifically to make sure it was fully in my driveway. You cited me because your son plays basketball in the neighborhood and you did not want competition for street games. Several people laughed. Barbara's face turned red. Patricia spoke up next. You told me I had too many flowers in my garden, too many flowers. How is that possibly a violation? The guideline states that gardens should be maintained in a neat and organized manner. Your garden was becoming overgrown. My garden won a state award from the Arizona Garden Club. It was featured in a magazine, but you did not like that it attracted bees, and you claimed it was a safety hazard. More laughter from the crowd. Barbara was losing control of the room. Then I stood up. Barbara, I think the real issue here is that you have used your position to pursue personal grudges and impose your personal preferences on the entire community. You have cost the HOA thousands of dollars in legal fees fighting battles that did not need to be fought, and when you lost, you tried to make all of us pay for it through a special assessment. Your fire pit was a legitimate safety concern, she shot back. The fire marshal disagrees. And the Architectural Review Board approved it, but you could not accept that, so you filed false complaints with the city. I did no such thing, really, because the city's code enforcement office has records of 3 anonymous complaints filed against my property, all of which were unfounded. They also have the ability to trace where those complaints came from. Would you like them to do that? Barbara said nothing, but her expression told me everything I needed to know. The meeting devolved into chaos after that, with multiple residents voicing their own complaints about Barbara's leadership. She tried to maintain order but eventually gave up and stormed out. The election took place via mail and ballot to ensure everyone could participate. The results were announced on August 25th. Barbara Wellington was removed from her position as HOA president by a vote of 183 to 47. Margaret Chen was elected as the new president. Her first act was to review all outstanding citations and fines. She dismissed mine entirely, along with Frank's and Patricia's. She also announced that the special assessment for legal fees was being reversed, and that the HOA would be implementing new guidelines to prevent future board overreach. I thought this was finally over. I could use my fire pit in peace. The HOA was under new management, and life could go back to normal. But there was one more twist. In early September, I received a call from Officer David Santos with the Scottsdale Police Department. "Mr. Ramsey, I am calling about a criminal complaint filed against Barbara Wellington. I understand you may have information relevant to the case." My stomach dropped. What kind of criminal complaint? False reporting to law enforcement. Miss Wellington apparently filed multiple false complaints with city code enforcement and may have also filed a false police report. We are investigating, and your name came up as one of the affected parties. I told Officer Santos everything, provided all my documentation, and gave a formal statement. It turned out I was not the only one. Frank Douglas had also been the subject of false reports. Barbara had allegedly filed a complaint claiming Frank was running an illegal business from his home, which was completely untrue. The investigation took several months. During that time, Barbara resigned from the HOA board entirely and became increasingly reclusive. I rarely saw her in the neighborhood, and when I did, she refused to make eye contact. In December, I received notice that Barbara Wellington had been charged with 3 counts of false reporting, a Class 1 misdemeanor in Arizona. Each count carried a potential penalty of up to 6 months in jail and a fine of up to $2,500. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts in exchange for dropping the third. She was sentenced to 120 hours of community service, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA for the legal fees incurred due to her actions. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board during her probation period. I did not attend her sentencing, but Frank did. He told me she gave a brief apology to the court, but never directly apologized to any of us. By the time winter rolled around, life in Sunset Ridge had returned to normal. Margaret Chen was doing an excellent job as HOA president, focusing on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement. The streetlight on Cactus Drive was finally fixed. The landscape company was replaced with a better one. And the board started holding regular town halls where residents could voice concerns in a respectful environment. As for my fire pit, I used it several times a week throughout the fall and winter. Tom came over with his family a few times, and we had small gatherings around the fire. Susan and her husband joined us once, bringing marshmallows for roasting. One evening in late December, as I sat by the fire watching the flames dance and sipping hot chocolate, I reflected on the whole experience. It had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had also taught me a lot about standing up for myself and not being bullied by bureaucratic overreach. The fire pit, which had started this entire saga, crackled peacefully. It had been worth the fight. Not just because I got to keep it, but because it exposed problems in our community that needed to be addressed. Barbara's removal had led to real positive changes for everyone. Tom walked over from next door, carrying 2 beers. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all." He handed me a beer and sat down in one of the chairs around the fire pit. "You know, I have been thinking about what happened with Barbara and the whole HOA thing." "Yeah, I am glad you fought it. A lot of people would have just removed the fire pit to avoid the hassle. But you stood your ground and it made a difference for everyone. I was just tired of being pushed around over something so ridiculous. Still, it took guts, and now the neighborhood is better for it. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire and enjoying the cool desert evening. The stars were bright above us, the air was crisp, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. The fire pit had been called a hazard, but the real hazard had been an HOA president drunk on petty power. Getting it certified by the fire marshal had been the first step in a much longer battle, but it had been the right move. Documentation, persistence, and a willingness to stand up for what was right had made all the difference in the end. Justice had been served, both for me and for the community. Barbara faced legal consequences for her actions. The HOA was under better management, and I got to enjoy my fire pit without harassment. As the evening wore on and Tom headed home, I stayed out a bit longer, adding a bit more propane to keep the flames going. The fire pit had become more than just a backyard amenity. It had become a symbol of standing up against unreasonable authority and fighting for what was right. I raised my beer in a small, private toast to that principle and settled back to enjoy the warmth of the fire and the satisfaction of a battle well fought and won. The next morning, I woke up feeling better than I had in months. The stress of the HOA battle had been weighing on me more than I realized, and now that it was truly over, I felt like I could breathe again. I made coffee and sat on my back patio, looking at the fire pit in the morning light. It really was a beautiful piece of equipment, well worth the $2,000 I had spent on it. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Ortiz. "Congratulations on the final resolution. Let me know if you need anything else, but I think we can officially close your file now." I texted back my thanks. Jennifer had been worth every penny, providing expert guidance and keeping me from making emotional decisions that could have hurt my case. A few days later, I ran into Margaret Chen at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, comparing avocados. "Oliver, hey." She greeted me warmly. "How are things?" "Really good, actually. Thanks for all you have done as president. The neighborhood feels different now." "That is what we are going for. You know, your situation with the fire pit really opened my eyes to how bad things had gotten. When I look back at some of the decisions the board made under Barbara's leadership, I am embarrassed I went along with as much as I did." "You voted to approve my fire pit," I pointed out. "True, but there were other times I should have pushed back harder. Anyway, I wanted to let you know that we are working on revising the HOA guidelines to make them clearer and less open to interpretation. We are also implementing an appeals process for citations, so there are checks and balances." "That sounds great." "And we are having a community holiday party next week at the clubhouse. You should come. Bring whoever you want." I promised I would attend. It was nice to have an HOA president who actually cared about building community rather than enforcing arbitrary rules. The holiday party turned out to be a great event. About 100 residents showed up, including families with kids. There was food, music, and a general atmosphere of goodwill that had been missing from the neighborhood for a long time. Frank Douglas found me near the punch bowl. "Oliver, there is someone I want you to meet. This is my friend Carl. He lives over in the Ridgeview HOA, and he is having a similar problem with an overzealous board." Carl was a guy about my age, looking stressed and tired. "Frank told me about what you went through." "I have been fighting with my HOA for 4 months over a solar panel installation. They keep saying it is an eyesore, but it is on the back of my roof, barely visible from the street. I told him about Jennifer Ortiz and how having good legal representation had made all the difference. I also emphasized the importance of documentation. Get everything in writing, I advised. Keep copies of everything. And if your solar panels are legal under city and state law, which they almost certainly are given Arizona's solar energy laws, then the HOA is going to have a hard time stopping you. Arizona has a solar rights law, Frank added. HOAs cannot prohibit solar panels, though they can have some say in placement. Carl looked relieved to have some direction. Thank you. It helps to know other people have dealt with this and won. As the party wound down, Margaret Chen made a brief speech thanking everyone for coming and wishing everyone happy holidays. She also announced that the HOA had finished the year under budget and would not be raising dues for the next year. This was met with applause. On my way out, Patricia Green stopped me. Oliver, I never properly thanked you for organizing the petition. My life has been so much better since Barbara left the board. We all organized it together, I said. But you are welcome. How is your garden thriving? And I am planning to expand it in the spring. I already submitted an application to the Architectural Review Board, and Margaret said it should be approved without any issues. That was the way it should work. Residents should be able to improve their properties within reasonable guidelines, and the HOA should facilitate that rather than obstruct it. As I drove home that evening, I felt genuinely grateful for how things had turned out. Yes, the battle with Barbara had been stressful and time-consuming, but it had led to positive change. The neighborhood was better off. I had made some good friends through the process, and I had learned a lot about standing up for myself. Over the holidays, I hosted a small gathering at my house. Tom and his family came over, along with Susan and her husband, and a few other neighbors I had gotten to know through the HOA drama. We gathered around the fire pit, roasted marshmallows, and shared stories. It was exactly what I had envisioned when I bought the fire pit in the first place, bringing people together in a warm, welcoming environment. Barbara's attempts to take that away had failed, and now I got to enjoy it surrounded by good people. As January rolled around, I found myself reflecting on the entire experience during my morning coffee routine. The fight over the fire pit had become something of a legend in the neighborhood. New residents moving in would hear about it and often stop by to see the famous fire pit that had sparked a revolution. One Saturday morning, a couple who had just moved in 3 houses down knocked on my door. The man introduced himself as Alan, and his wife was named Rebecca. "We have heard the story about the fire pit and the HOA drama," Alan said. "We wanted to introduce ourselves and also ask you a question. We are thinking about installing a pergola in our backyard. What is the best way to go about getting approval?" I walked them through the process, emphasizing the importance of submitting detailed plans and being proactive about communication with the Architectural Review Board. The board is much more reasonable now, I assured them. As long as your pergola meets basic aesthetic guidelines and is not violating any codes, you should be fine. That is good to hear. The previous neighborhood we lived in had an HOA that was a nightmare. We were worried this might be similar. It was heading that direction, but the community pushed back. Now it is pretty good. They thanked me and left, seeming much more at ease. It felt good to be able to reassure new neighbors that they were moving into a good community with a reasonable HOA. In February, I received an unexpected email from Inspector Marcus Davis, the fire marshal who had certified my fire pit. "Mr. Ramsey, I wanted to follow up on your situation. I heard through the grapevine that things worked out well for you, and that the former HOA president faced legal consequences for filing false reports. I am glad you persisted, and that your documentation helped build the case. I also wanted you to know that your situation has led to some internal discussions here about how we handle HOA disputes. We are considering creating a formal certification program for common outdoor appliances like fire pits, grills, and heaters. If homeowners can get an official certification, it should prevent HOAs from making unfounded safety claims. Would you be willing to provide a testimonial for the program? I immediately responded that I would be happy to help. The idea of a certification program was brilliant and would save future homeowners from going through what I had experienced. A few weeks later, I participated in a video interview with the fire marshal's office, explaining my experience and how Inspector Davis's certification had been crucial in proving my fire pit was safe. The fire marshal's office used this as part of their presentation to the city council proposing the new certification program. The program was approved in April. For a small fee, Scottsdale residents could request an official inspection and certification of outdoor appliances. The certification was valid for 5 years and provided legal protection against HOA claims of safety violations. I was proud to have played a part in creating something that would help other homeowners. What had started as a personal frustration had led to systemic change, both in my HOA and in the city's approach to these issues. By the time summer arrived, life in Sunset Ridge had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The HOA was functioning well under Margaret's leadership. The neighborhood felt more like an actual community, with regular events and friendly neighbors who looked out for each other. My fire pit continued to be a central gathering spot. I hosted movie nights in my backyard, projecting films onto a white sheet while people sat around the fire pit. I had game nights where we played board games on the patio with the fire providing warmth and ambience. And I had countless quiet evenings by myself, just enjoying the peace and the flames. One particularly memorable evening in June, Tom organized a block party centered around fire pit hopping. Several neighbors, inspired by my experience and the new certification program, had gotten their own fire pits approved and installed. We went from house to house throughout the evening, spending time at each fire pit, sharing food and stories. It was a perfect example of how something that had started with conflict and confrontation had ultimately brought people together. Barbara had seen the fire pit as a threat to her vision of neighborhood uniformity. But the fire pit, and the others that followed, had actually enhanced the community by giving people a reason to gather and connect. In August, around the 1-year anniversary of Barbara's removal from the board, Margaret organized a community meeting to review the changes that had been implemented and gather feedback on how things were going. The turnout was strong, with about 60 residents attending. Margaret went through a list of accomplishments: updated and clarified guidelines, a fairer appeals process, improved communication between the board and residents, better vendor relationships, and a healthier financial position. I also want to acknowledge, Margaret said, looking directly at me, that a lot of these improvements came from residents being willing to speak up when things were not right. Oliver, your fight over the fire pit was the catalyst for real change. Thank you for not backing down. The room applauded, which was both gratifying and a little embarrassing. I stood up briefly and waved, not wanting to make a big speech. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me personally. It was humbling and strange to be treated like some kind of neighborhood hero just for refusing to be bullied. As fall approached, I found myself thinking about the upcoming anniversary of the fire pit installation. It had been just over a year since I had bought and installed it. Kicking off the whole saga, on the actual anniversary date, I decided to have a small celebration. I invited everyone who had been part of the journey: Tom and Susan, Frank and Patricia, Jennifer Ortiz, and even Margaret Chen. I also reached out to Inspector Davis, who surprised me by actually showing up. We gathered around the fire pit on a beautiful September evening, the weather finally starting to cool down after a brutal Arizona summer. I raised a glass of beer and made a toast. 1 year ago, I installed this fire pit without HOA approval, which was probably not my smartest move. That decision led to months of conflict, legal battles, and more stress than I care to remember. But it also led to real positive change in this community and new friendships. So here is to standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. And here is to fire pits that bring people together rather than drive them apart. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered. The evening was filled with laughter, good conversation, and the warm glow of the fire pit that had started it all. As the night wore on and people gradually headed home, I sat alone with the fire pit one more time, reflecting on everything that had happened. The journey had taught me valuable lessons about persistence, the importance of documentation, the power of community organizing, and the need to stand up against unreasonable authority. Barbara Wellington had tried to use her position to impose her will on the neighborhood, and for a while, it had worked. But ultimately, the community had rejected her approach and chosen a better path. The legal consequences she faced were appropriate. Filing false reports was not just petty harassment. It was a crime that wasted public resources and could have had serious implications for the people she targeted. Her guilty plea and sentence sent a message that such behavior would not be tolerated. As I extinguished the fire pit and headed inside for the night, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The fight had been worth it. Justice had prevailed, and my backyard had become a symbol of what happens when ordinary people refuse to be pushed around by petty tyrants. The fire pit continued to burn bright, both literally and metaphorically, representing the enduring value of standing up for what is right and the importance of community over control.